Okay, everyone, I have a pretty incredible guest this week. Her name is Dené Logan, and she is a marriage and family therapist and author of the book Sovereign Love. And she's the co-host of an incredible podcast called Cheaper Than Therapy. And she helps others get in touch with the deeper layers of their capital S selves. But our conversation is mostly about the dance between feminine and masculine energies because she's an expert in that. And so with everything going on and so much gender wars right now, she kind of clears everything up. And so our conversation is one that I think was very needed. I regularly get questions from all of you about, is this masculine? Is this feminine? And I think that there's just so much misinformation out there. And I think that people are very deeply confused, understandably, about what these two energies actually are. And so I really wanted to have on the show an expert to kind of demystify all that and to have a conversation about that, especially from someone who works so closely with couples. So without further ado, my conversation with Dené Logan. Welcome, Dené.
Thank you, Jillian. I'm so excited to get to talk to you.
I'm very excited to have this conversation. I once read somewhere, these are your words. I hope they're your words, but I'm pretty sure they are. Healing relationships isn't about fixing the other person. It's about finding harmony within. I could not agree more.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, how does one find harmony within?
Yeah. I think a lot of what you're speaking to is a lot of why I appreciate your work so much, Jillian. I think so much of what I have found over time working with couples, and I work primarily as a couples therapist over time, is that the only way that dynamics between us change, like myself and another person ever really shift, is if each person is willing to take 100% responsibility for the energy that they are bringing to the dynamic. And I say this to couples often, and it's not so much that we are not impacted by the other person's energy, or that, the other person's behavior doesn't influence the way that the two of us are able to find harmony, but it's that the only person we are ever able to be in control of is ourselves, right?
Yes.
So a lot of times we will spend so much of our energetic resources attempting to get another person to change. And what I have certainly experienced in my own life and many years working with clients is that people don't change because another person decides that they need to. It normally comes from an internally motivated place. And so if we can really be in relationship with our own energy and the story that we're telling ourselves and some of our historic pain points in our relationship dynamics, what I find ends up happening is it's a lot more likely that the energy between us as a couple starts to shift as I take responsibility for the part that I'm bringing to our dynamic,
I couldn't agree with you more, but it is so hard.
Such big work.
Very, very hard. Because we, when we're hurt in a relationship, we think, well, if they just did this one thing, then I would feel better. Or, I could change if they would change. Mm-hmm. And our egos get so involved in it. And you talk a lot about society and treating relationships as if they're transactional. And, I think it's a dangerous thing to approach a relationship from 50-50. I mean, let me backtrack. It's way better than what it was many, 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 many moons ago. But what are your thoughts on 50-50 transactional relationships? Because how do we take responsibility in a relation for our energy and for what we're bringing to a relationship if we're constantly thinking, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine first?
Yeah. I think in so many ways we are entering a period in time, and this is what I think is shifting, where we're starting to see the purpose of relationships as being something different than they've been in the past. And for so long, when we talk about transactional relationships, that was actually the paradigm that we were raised in. And in a lot of ways, that was based on our survival, right? So if we think about all of the messaging we get in Western culture about, what relationships should be within a nuclear family structure, a lot of that was based on, if we sort of go back and look at the historic context of that, certainly for women, that our survival was connected to being in these relationship dynamics and, that we couldn't have our own bank accounts. And so we sort of needed a husband to survive and all of those things, right? But what we've sort of passed down generationally and had passed down from our mothers and our mothers' mothers is really protecting ourselves at all costs and keeping score and sort of an adversarial energy a lot of times in these relationships. And, I believe that we're coming into a place where we're sort of shifting from just our ego mind's construct of who another person should be in any given moment to make me comfortable, to really seeing these relationship dynamics as divine assignments, and that this person in front of me is sort of mirroring all of my pain points, all of the things that I've been hurt by in the past, maybe the story I'm telling myself about why I am or am not enough. And that if I can see it that way and slow down my process a little bit, and it does require a little bit of slowing down so we can get into that inquiry, then all of a sudden this person becomes my teacher, and our relationship dynamic becomes the curriculum. And it's less about what I get from this relationship, but what each of us are able to pour into one another, hopefully from the overflow of the way that we're really taking responsibility for filling ourselves up with, some of that cleanup work around the limiting beliefs and the things that were never true about who we actually are. But we've been conditioned to believe that, if this person can just get there, then I'll feel this thing that inevitably it never actually makes us feel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You speak a lot about feminine and masculine dynamics, and your book was heavily focused on balancing those energies within ourselves. I'd love to dig into this a little bit with you, because there is so much. It's almost become social media mainstream to talk about the masculine and feminine energies. And I think that whenever that happens, meaning gets lost.
Yeah.
Right. and also, it's also weaponized. Or you're doing that, that's not masculine, or you're doing that and that's not feminine. And it's really made me pause and think, well, wait a second. Who says that's not masculine? And who says that's not feminine? And, or that a woman who has a career is in her masculine. I don't understand that. I don't agree with it. And so I think this is something that people are really interested in. And I just love that I have you here today on the show to can we dig a little deep into what is masculine energy versus feminine energy, how it plays out in relationships, and because I do believe that this concept of polarity is what creates sort of sexual tension between two people, and that it is important. But I also think this is such a nuanced conversation. And so I'd love to hear your definition of it and how it plays out, and any myths that maybe we should bust about this.
First of all, Jillian, thank you for the opportunity to create some clarification, because I think that there is a way that these dynamics are being talked about in social media a lot of times that I think are sort of distortions and certainly minimizations of what we're talking about when we talk about these dualities that exist within all of us. And there's a way that we can sort of talk about them as if they are to be assigning gender roles. And that's not so much, to me, the point and what we're talking about. I come from a background in studying Jungian psychology, and Carl Jung was the first person in terms of psychology to really talk about the anima and the animus as these energies that exist within all of us, regardless of how we identify in terms of gender. But it's really ancient wisdom. And if you go back and look at, throughout history, all the different cultures, geographical locations, there's a way that we talked about these energies of duality, which we can talk about, like sun, moon, yin, yang, like all of these different ways that they show up. But, you know, what I started to be really interested in as I was sitting with couples is that I could see there was a way that, first of all, the ways that we've all been socialized around gender, we've never really had a reckoning with, and that those energies that we're grappling with and sort of conditioned to diminish or reject within ourselves. So if I identify as a man in terms of gender, the aspects of my feminine that I've really been conditioned to reject within myself and vice versa, that those things start to play out in our dynamics, but also that I could see that couples were really competing for energy. And if we believe there's something I need outside of myself to be whole, like if I'm a man, in terms of how I identify, and I believe that I have to completely reject all of the feminine aspects of myself, then I will look to my partner to give me all of those things, right? I will need that energy from my partner consistently, and I won't, first of all, be in right relationship with those aspects of myself, but it becomes this thing of what we were talking about before, where it's like a bottomless bucket of need. Like my partner can pour that energy into me, but it's never enough.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. I am a huge believer in mentorship, in having mentors, teachers, a support system, confidants, whether that's in the form of a therapist or a coach or, I don't know, your yoga teacher or your meditation teacher or your best friends. It's just huge. And to have the support of a therapist who you really trust and a community is just, it's a game changer. And that doesn't have to be a big community. It could be a very, very small one. So think about your favorite leaders, your mentors, or even your idols. They don't have all the answers. They're not your guru, but they do know when to ask questions or seek support from their community. And in a society that glorifies hyper-independence, it's easy to forget that we are all better when we have a support system behind us. Therapy can be a source of support for any area of your life. So it's time to shift the focus from doing it all yourself to know when we're better when we ask for help. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. And not only that, you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost, which is huge because it's like any other relationship. Sometimes you have to try a couple to find the one that you really connect with. So build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/onlove to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/onlove.
And what I started to see, especially when I would be working with couples and a child would enter the picture, it would be one thing for them to sort of be battling for energy when it was just the two of them. But then when there was another person in the room, like let's say battling for mom's energy, all of a sudden it became like a war zone. And I just was fascinated by there are ways that, you know, if we say there's like, it's tough to talk about. And it is, as you were saying, it's nuanced because it's multiple truths that we're holding at the same time, that there are ways that, you know, I never thought about this until I became a mother, but when a woman has a child, she is really in what we would consider her masculine energy. That's not a bad thing. It's just the energetic.
When a mother has a child, she's in her masculine energy.
I know, it's counterintuitive.
Can we tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah. So motherhood, especially the way that we are conditioned to be mothers in the West, is very task and contain and protect and, you know, keep this kid alive and delegate responsibilities. And it's very like, get out of my way.
Yeah.
Do all of these things, right? And so you feel very, you know, and those are sort of like maybe healthy masculine qualities, but you're very much in that masculine energy now.
But why wouldn't it be, sorry to interrupt, but why wouldn't it be is it archetypical or archetypal? I don't even know how to pronounce it. But why wouldn't it just be a different archetype of the feminine?
And certainly,
why? Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's where I get confused. This is where I get tripped up in this whole masculine and feminine theories and conversations. This is where I get confused.
Yeah, and it certainly can be like a different element. And that's the thing, I think that because they're dualities and they're like, we're thinking about the polar opposite ways, it's like a dance that goes on between. So even when I'm sort of in what might be considered my masculine energy as a woman, that could be a really strong feminine archetype, right? It's not like it doesn't negate me in my feminine to be in this motherhood role. There's a way, though, that when I am in relationship with a man in a nuclear family structure, it can start to feel like, for couples, a little bit of a battle of the alphas. Now, the reason it is that way is because I don't believe we were meant to do this with just two people attempting to raise a child in a way that like an entire village used to support us in doing. But so it sort of feels like a lot of times for the man, like, not only do I not know what my role is, or you're feeling overwhelmed and sort of talking down to me a lot of times, and that feels like a really sort of, demanding that I like to use like dominant submission language, like that you saying that I should submit to you, but also that I just don't really know what my role is, where my wife has gone. And it feels a lot of times, and this is one of the things I think we don't discuss societally, is like how much abandonment there can be for men in those relationship dynamics and how they feel really lost,
Oh, absolutely. And the birth of the first child can definitely trigger those fears and those feelings of abandonment.
Yeah. So it's just, for me, as I started to notice, like, oh, these are the energetics are happening. It's not so much like, this is your role, get there and stay there. This is how you do it, right? It's just to be in that space of awareness. And like you were saying, there's a lot of things about understanding these polarities that can create arousal and magnetic energy or repellent energy. And if we're in relationship to it, we can understand it versus just sort of feeling like we're doing it wrong. We can't find harmony. We're at odds with each other all the time,
So how would you define feminine energy versus masculine energy?
Yeah. So, and here's an important distinction, because I've heard a lot, especially really recently in the cultural zeitgeist, that I think it's important to create some clarification around. And when I talk about masculine and feminine energetics, I will talk about them from a wounded or a distorted place, but then also from like a more healthy place, right? And so I think our culture on the whole has put a lot of emphasis on what I would call distorted or wounded masculine energy. And that's aside from gender. So that's sort of productivity at all costs, that John Wayne, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I don't need anybody, hyper independent, sometimes avoidant energy, if we're talking about it in attachment language.
Yes.
That's sort of that wounded masculine energy, right? A wounded feminine energetic or distorted feminine energy is sort of, that clingy, needing something outside of me to validate, people pleasing, identifying myself based on how other people think of me, that anxious energy in terms of attachment styles. So those are all like the wounded paradigms.
And they can be in whatever genders. A woman can experience the wounded masculine and wounded feminine inside of her simultaneously. And a man can feel that wounding, can also potentially feel that wounding in both areas.
Absolutely. And I love to say, we will experience it within a given day.
I know, in any given, it's very true. So then the healthy.
Yes. And so, it's interesting. Forever, I used to say our culture doesn't have any sort of reverence or models of healthy feminine energy. And we've really been a culture that has conditioned us to reject the feminine within ourselves in all these different ways. Like, don't throw like a girl, don't be a girl, like all of these ways that we don't value things like vulnerability and collaboration and, allowing ourselves to be seen in the raw truth of who we are. Those are like healthy feminine characteristics that we are conditioned not to value. But what I've come to understand over time is we're actually a culture that doesn't really value healthy masculine energy either. And we don't have a lot of models for what that looks like or how to embody that. And that's sort of that thing of, really inner rooted from the space within, sense of confidence and, that unshakable sense of like, this is who I am. I define myself for myself, and I like am rooted in mission and how I want to show up in the world and what I want my legacy to be. We just don't have a lot of models of that. And I believe it's because we're a culture that was really raised without a lot of elders or reverence for elders, sort of giving us that sense of guidance, initiating us into the next phase of who we're going to be as people. And so without that, I think we've really lost touch to something that we feel tethered to. And hopefully, I think that's where we're shifting into coming back into, just really valuing community in a way that I feel like we haven't for a really long time now.
Yeah, you said something about not having elders. What do you think? Because there's always elders, but do you think it's just our value system not valuing the perspective of the elder?
We've sort of lost that. I think there are cultures and collectivist cultures, they really sit with the elders and spend time with them.
Know.
I think we, usher our older members of society into assisted living facilities, and we don't spend time with them, and we're really afraid of the process of death in all forms. And so I think we really shy away from the recognition that we're all going to be getting older at some point. And I think without that, so much is lost in terms of wisdom and leadership. And, it's funny. I think there's a way that we just don't talk about how we'll talk about like things like toxic masculinity, but we don't talk about like what happens to young boys when they don't have any sort of initiatory period, like certain cultures do, teaching them what it is to be a man. I think as women, a lot of times we're socialized a little bit more to be in community with one another and to connect. But I can't tell you how often I sit with couples where the man in a heterosexual dynamic, like his wife is his everything. He doesn't talk, in a vulnerable space with anyone other than his wife. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So he's able to be vulnerable with his wife.
And that ends up being something that a lot of times she doesn't have a lot of capacity for, especially like, when there's kids and there's lives. And I saw this like heartbreaking reel the other day where a man was attempting to share something vulnerable with his wife. And she sort of, she made fun of him. I don't even know what the thing was, but you could see how much he was attempting to be vulnerable with her. And, a lot of our internalized misogyny or ways that we like hold all of these things, like we as women carry just as much of that as men. And so it was really so sad to see not only her shame her husband, but also that a lot of times that's the only person in a man's life that he has to be vulnerable with, because society really teaches men not to do that,
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When it comes to hiring, if you are someone who needs to hire in any capacity, truly Indeed is all you need. So you have to stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites, because Indeed sponsored jobs really do help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. And it actually really does make a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. One of the things I love about it is that it's made hiring really fast and really easy. Because in the past, when I was looking to hire someone, it was so slow and so overwhelming. And honestly, I really wish that I had Indeed. So there's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/JOL. Just go to Indeed.com/JOL right now. And support our show, please, by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/JOL. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. I also, I couldn't agree with you more. And I also think that one thing that women who date men need to understand is that, men really do fall in love based on who makes them feel safe too. They may want to sleep with you and many other women, but that's, big whoop, I mean, but they fall in love with a woman where they feel seen and understood. And so, because they go through life feeling also misunderstood and not being able to express themselves. What is healthy feminine?
Yeah, I like smile even as I think about it, because I think that we are living through a time where the feminine is rising within all of us. And we're moving, from my perspective, from like a 5D consciousness, which is sort of like what we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, to like getting back in touch with our intuition and really paying attention to the synchronicities of life and all of these aspects of our feminine wisdom that are really the aspects of our soul, like beyond just what we can touch and tangibly like get our hands on. The parts are like, I don't know why this is true, but I just somehow know this is an aspect of my life that is true. And, you know, the feminine is the part of us that trusts in our intuition and trusts in the flow of life and allows ourselves to be who I think we came here to authentically be, and be in like, you know, that free flowing energy of a capital S self. But there's so much about the way that we've been conditioned for centuries that has taught us it's not safe to do that. And again, it's not within gender at all. This is like all of us coming back into that space of integrating that healthy feminine within.
Yeah, I think about Shiva and Shakti in Hindu, you know, because I have a history in yoga.
Yeah.
And that Shakti, you know, the energy of Shakti, which is feminine, is very powerful and can sometimes be very erratic, as we women can be. Yep. And Shiva is just is like the destroyer, right? He's very you think of like a sword and something that just sort of like cuts through the noise. That's very sharp energy. Yeah. And Shakti energy is more voluminous. So when we're taking this into a dating scenario, what are some things that you think women get wrong and some things that men get wrong vis-a-vis embodying their energy from the masculine and feminine lens? What are some things that you think they're getting wrong, or that might be getting in the way of them having a successful dating experience or meeting someone? And what are some things that they can do differently?
Yeah. You know, when I think about these energetics and what it means to do this integrative work of integrating our masculine and feminine, it's really about coming back into right relationship with myself so that I can just be present, right? Yeah. And I think so often when we're dating, we're in this space of, it's almost like, well, certainly for women, and I think a lot of the ways that we're socialized, it's almost like we're on a job interview. Like, what can I do to get this person to pick me? What can I say to like, whatever you need to say to like decide that I'm the one? And a lot of that is our cultural programming, but it's, you know, if I sort of integrate that energy of a strong sense of self where, yes, I get to be present and I get to trust in life and go with the flow a little bit. That's me and my feminine. But then like me integrating my healthy masculine is that thing of like that penetrative presence and just like really, you know, a little bit my fierce protector energy that like, I've got me, I know who I am, I get to stand in that truth. And then I think we get to come a little bit back to meeting one another in that soul space. You know, I think we're so like playing out these roles and just like really dehumanizing one another. So many of my clients, I talk to them about dating and I'm like, whew, I'm like tired of listening to
it's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
It's intense. It's intense.
But it's because we're sort of playing roles versus like really being present with another human. But a lot of that requires a strong sense of self. And like none of us live there. It's a practice. We're always going to be bringing ourselves back. But what I try to do in the book is unpack, first of all, some of the historic context for what makes that so hard, but then how we do that work of like paying attention to our energy and bringing ourselves back to our center.
How do we bring ourselves back to the center, to our centers?
Yeah. You know, I think it's so much of, you know, for the first half of our life, we're so oriented towards the external world and what other people think of me, which is really like that masculine energy, right? So like we're out there and we're like doing all of the work to, you know, accomplish things in school, get a job, get the house with a picket fence, right? And then in Jungian psychology, the way we talk about it is sort of like at that way point of life, we do that work of starting to come into the individuation process, which is I start to go inward a little bit and define myself for myself and think about like what is true beyond what I've been taught, right? And I believe we are starting to do that a little bit earlier. And a lot of times, we'll go through something which is an initiatory period of like a crisis or a breakup or, a loss of some kind that will sort of expedite that process of individuation for us, and we'll start to go inward and start asking some of those questions and getting to know ourselves. And that's a lot of times when we'll do some of those things of doing the work of an inquiry, like going to start a yoga practice or going to see a therapist, or all of these ways that we start to become identified with our inner landscape a little bit more. And I sort of have this theory, Jillian, that like, it's not so much that like we shouldn't date until we've sort of done some of that work, but I think we need to normalize just really believing that we're not incomplete until we're partnered. I think that puts a lot of pressure on the dating process. And I think we sort of believe this other person is going to be the other half that I need to be whole. And then, people come to me as the couples therapist and not finding a lot of fulfillment. And it's because I didn't really do the work of getting to know myself well before I started that. So certainly I can be in therapy, I can be doing something like a yoga practice or things like meditation that really get me in relationship with my inner landscape in a way that I think we're just not really socialized to do in our culture. And then when things inevitably come up when I'm dating someone or when I'm in a relationship, I can be in that inquiry that we're talking about. Like, is this mine? Is this person's? Is it historic? Like, what feels familiar about this versus just feeling like it's this person's responsibility to clean it up and make it go away. And I feel something, so it must be, about what you're evoking within me. And if each person's doing that, then hopefully we can find a little more harmony.
This episode is sponsored by Galatea. Do you know the feeling when you finish like an incredible love story? Your heart is still racing. You have butterflies in your stomach. I mean, I know I've experienced this. And all you want is more, whether you're reading this or watching this. More pages, more passion, more longing. Go deeper, fall harder, and lose yourself in romance with Galatea. A good book is great, but what if you had an endless library of delicious romance at your fingertips? I know this is going to resonate a lot more with my female audience, but go with me because this is kind of incredible. With Galatea, you don't just read, you get swept away in every stolen glance and every heart-pounding touch you can't stop thinking about. Whatever kind of love story you crave, you'll find it on Galatea. Galatea is a reading app where anyone craving a little me time can dive into a library of romance stories that leave you feeling recharged and fulfilled. There are over 1,000 bestsellers to choose from shifter romance to bad boy billionaires, forbidden love, werewolf alpha, slow burn fantasy, teen drama, and much, much more. Look, I know that many of you are into this, so don't even try to act like you are not. Over 30 million people have fallen in love with reading on Galatea. Join now to indulge in stories that make you feel like yourself again. Right now, Galatea is offering our listeners an extra 25% off on top of an already irresistibly affordable subscription when you go to galatea.com/Jillian. That's GALATEA.com/Jillian to indulge in unlimited stories for even less. galatea.com/Jillian. I heard a rabbi say something that I thought was actually very interesting and spot on. And he's modern in his approach, so he does speak a lot to masculine and feminine versus just gender. And he said, because he was speaking on the topic of giving, and that women, or those who heavily identify with the feminine, like that's what they heavily identify with, we're just sort of natural born givers. We give a lot. We nurture a lot. Part of that is some societal conditioning, but part of that is just biology and just part of our nature. And what happens is that when the feminine is in relationship with the masculine, she will often become the overgiver and then feel like she's not getting a lot. And he said that that the best relationships he's seen are ones in which the masculine, or those who identify more with the masculine, or those who can kind of take this on, they should be the initiator of giving. And when you give to the feminine, we fill up so much from that in a way that, or the feminine side of us fills up so much from that our cups overflow, and that we are always going to give back 10 times. But all we need is we need it to be initiated.
Beautiful.
And I thought that was very interesting and spot on, because I do think a lot of the people who I worked with would feel like more fulfilled if that dynamic was happening. If there was a little, and obviously in gay relationships, it might be a little bit different. It might be more of a give and take in that way. But when you're in a relationship where one person heavily identifies and feels more of the feminine, one feels more of the masculine, that, or you could think of it as gender, as a heterosexual relationship, that when the man is initiating the giving, then that is what's going to overflow her cup, and he's just going to get that much more in return. And then they both feel very satiated from that dynamic. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I think there's, you were asking about some of the distortions or the ways that we're taught that things are supposed to be in relationship dynamics that I find are problematic over time. And this is one of them. I think if, people ask me sometimes, like, what's the number one thing couples come in struggling with? And I would say it's physical intimacy.
Yes.
And there's a part of what you're saying that is the reason for that from my perspective. And I think a lot of, yes, there are ways that it is natural to be in that space of nurturance and connection. And those are very like feminine attributes, but there are ways that actually there's a distortion in the space of that we are conditioned. It is always our role to be giving as women. And even if you think about our anatomy, the masculine is actually the force that gives. The feminine is the force that receives. But I find for most of us as women, the way that we're socialized makes it very difficult for us to receive. I was at a retreat with a group of women, and there was, our chef was so beautiful, and she was like, I made you all coffee and things. And we were like, no, don't do that for me. I got it. No, don't and we were all like so quick to like, don't do anything. I'll do it. Don't like receive, right? We're so socialized that it's weakness, or you shouldn't be the one who over receives or whatever it is, right? That I find a lot of times we're not aware of how good in heterosexual dynamics it feels for a man to be able to give to you, and that he is so hungry to be in sort of that template of protect, provide, the one who is able to procreate. And if he feels like you don't need anything from him, he can energetically feel a little bit like, why am I here if you've got everything,
Yeah, I've said that before too. So to that point, let's talk about the self-sufficient, independent, financially successful woman who goes out in the dating world. Are men intimidated by her? So number one, are men intimidated by her? Number two, is it not that they're intimidated, but on an unconscious level, they're repelled because they think, where do I fit into this woman's life? Yeah. Or is it number three, that kind of woman, she just needs a strong man, and a particular kind of man? Because how is she? So it's one thing for that woman. Is she supposed to change? I mean, that's who she is. And she's proud of that. And that's part of her personality. I always say, if you're just going to be invulnerable, people are not going to really be that interested in you if you're invulnerable, especially as a woman. You have to have some vulnerability. So I always want to know, is that woman going in like that into a date with these iron walls in front of her? Or is she that but also has social skills and can connect and can emote and can laugh, you know? So I think that that's part of it. It's not so much that she's hyper independent. It's because I've seen women who are not that personality type, but their walls are up. I just think that walls up are really what, I guess I think I'm touching on a lot of different things here, but I'm curious to know your thoughts.
You are, and I love it. Because I think it's a both and there's absolutely a lot of what you're saying in there. But I also think, you know, the Western framework of the nuclear family was really set up to be a codependent dynamic from my perspective. And here's what I mean. It was sort of that, you know, men would be dependent on women for their meaning and for like their life force and their connection to the feminine. And women would be dependent on men for their economic security. Now, our generation of women, I might be a little older than you, but like we were sort of raised that...
You're probably not.
We might be the same age, but we were sort of raised
definitely. Did you just have a baby?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm 46, but we were sort of...
I'm older.
No, well, anyway, but our generation was raised like you can do anything. You can become anything you want as a woman, like get in there and like make it happen, which is hallelujah, such a beautiful thing. And I think at the same time, we weren't a generation that really raised the men sitting next to us to how to understand how to be next to a strong, powerful woman and not feel diminished by that. And I see so often that, you know, these men with like the most beautiful intentions to be the primary caregiver in the family dynamic or next to a woman who is really powerful, there is still a lot of societal messaging that makes it really hard for him to stay in that space and not feel some kind of way about that. Now, that being said, I do think there is an element of what you're speaking to in that there's a lot of energy that we as women, and I'll be the first to raise my hand, like been there. And so I say this without a hint of righteousness, but that there can be that energetic of, I don't need anybody, I got this. And that can be really hard to be in relationship with sometimes. So it's a little bit, how do we support our brothers in that there's, you know, it's less about like gender roles. It's more about like, who's most suited to do this? Who loves doing whatever the thing is? Let's divide and conquer. And looking at our roles a little bit more like that, then this is what society tells me is meant to be my role. So we need to stay solidified in that.
This episode is sponsored by Blueland. Did you know that an estimated 5 billion plastic hand soap and cleaning bottles are thrown away each year? It's nuts. That's not bad enough. Most cleaning formulas are 90% water. Plus, those products are often filled with really bad ingredients, nasty ingredients, like chlorine and ammonia. Blueland is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean you're used to, plus the packaging is beautiful. If you're like me, that matters. It's not the most important thing, but I have to say, like, they just did it so beautifully, and I love it because then I have it on my counter and it looks good. The idea is simple. They offer refillable cleaning products with a beautiful cohesive design that looks great on your counter. Blueland products are independently tested to perform alongside major brands and are free from dyes, bleach, and harsh chemicals. Yes, yes, yes. Blueland has a special offer for listeners right now. Get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/Jillian. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/Jillian for 15% off. That's blueland.com/Jillian to get 15% off. As women start to make more money and to be bigger forces in the career world, in the workforce, I think that what men need to understand is that that their quote unquote providership can go a very long way with emotional support.
That's right.
And that you can still very much feel masculine in a relationship, even if you're not the breadwinner, because of other, it's really not, I mean, look, there are people, you're not automatically the masculine person when you make more money. That is the gender role. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to energetics, it's Are you providing a safe container? Are you creating some stability inside of the relationship? You said something, and I know I'm jumping a little bit here, but I think this is really important. I don't want to forget that historically men would get their fill of the feminine from the woman without him actually finding it within himself. And then women would get their, need like financial stability from men. This idea, and I did an episode on this of, if she's not happy, then I'm repelled. If she's not smiling, I'm repelled. Or if she's not happy, then I can't make her happy. I think a lot of women in relationships feel, I've heard this a lot and I've felt this, feel this pressure to be always happy. And then if we're not, the stress that causes our masculine partner is very intense. And I wonder if that is a manifestation of the masculine man trying to get his fill. It's like, no, you have to be this way because unconsciously I'm being filled up by your smiling energy.
Yes.
It's healing to me. And so if you're not that, where do I get that beautiful, feminine, flowy, healing energy?
That's right. Yeah.
And so I'm going to resent you.
Yep.
I'm going to resent you and blame you for not being what I need you to be.
Yeah.
I see this all the time. I'm curious if you do too.
Such a common...
and it works reverse too. This is not about putting down this works.
No,
it's reverse as well. I don't feel safe and you're not making me feel safe constantly. That's what women will do. But
yeah. And it's, to me, what it is it's such a rejection of their own feminine, meaning if, it's what you were saying before about like what the feminine, that Shakti energy actually is. A lot of times we think about the feminine as the radiance and the life force and like the free flowing fun energy, but the feminine is also dark and wild, and untamed, and angry and rageful. Like that is also a part of all of our feminine. It's like the full spectrum of emotion. And so if I have disavowed or am not able to be in relationship with those aspects of myself, and this is again, regardless of gender, I think so much of the time when I am rejecting myself, it is when I am in the aspects of my feminine that I've been taught are not the ones that we want to, celebrate and be excited about, like the really dark, difficult aspects of my feminine, the rageful, the angry, like those ones I can have a lot of self-judgment around. But if I've never really learned to be in relationship with those aspects of myself, it can be really difficult for me to tolerate them in you. And so again, that's that thing of why we need to integrate these aspects of ourselves for ourselves versus feeling like I can outsource this from another person, because yes, your partner is going to be the full spectrum of human, and sometimes her feminine is going to be radiant and sometimes it's going to be a little wrathful, and that's, or
sometimes she's going to be tense,
exactly,
and not not in that radiance at all.
Absolutely.
How do we start the integration process? I would imagine it starts with an awareness, but how do we start to integrate those sort of repressed parts of ourselves?
Yeah, I think
and feel more whole.
That's that shadow work, right? Like whatever aspects of myself I always love to say, like the parts of myself that I've relegated to the basement and I can't look there, that's sort of, Joseph Campbell said, like the door you fear to enter is where your treasure resides. So whatever are the aspects of myself that I can't be in relationship with, that's where I need to start, right? Whatever I have the biggest judgment about, or feel like if anybody knew this about me, then they absolutely couldn't love me. Well, beautiful. That's where our work is to get started. And I think the more that we are able to be in that space of self-acceptance, the more that we're able to be present with everyone that we're in relationship with, but we can only meet another person to the extent that we've met ourselves. And so a lot of it is that shadow work, and that we have to go back I like to say a lot of times for that young part of us that got the messaging that there were certain ways of being that were acceptable. And like we were just talking about, there are certain ways like you don't get to be that version of self and still be worthy of love.
So can you break down a little bit into steps what shadow work is?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the ways I think this comes up with dating a lot, and I know you talk a lot about what it is to like be out in these streets dating. So, let's say that someone I feel like I've just like fallen in love with, and like we have this connection that's so incredible that I know this person is the one. And then all of a sudden he ghosts me, right? And I am feeling all of these overwhelming feelings of rejection and that it's about this person. If I had this person coming in, I would be like, okay, well, let's do some shadow work around, first of all, what were the things that this person evoked within you about yourself that felt like really beautiful to feel? And how am I sort of projecting onto that other person that that's about them when maybe those are aspects of myself that I'm really longing to claim within me and that I'm not giving myself permission to embody for whatever reason. And I'm sort of believing that that person is the key to me experiencing those things. But then the other thing is, if we go back, and I think this is the interesting thing about ghosting a lot of times, it's like if I'm really honest with myself and I sort of look back at the play-by-play of the dynamic with this person, there are ways normally I find that there's something historic about the way that person made me feel, right? So if there's like a little bit of breadcrumbing, some hot and cold behavior, all of that, a lot of times it's something historic in terms of the way that a parent or caregiver made me feel. So if this person would be like, there and so present and into me 1 minute, and then I don't hear from them for a couple weeks and then they come back, normally there's something that's a little bit familiar if I dig deep around the way that like maybe mom would like stonewall and not talk to me for a couple of days when I did something that she didn't like. And it, was like, I was like desperate to get that energy of her attention back. And a lot of times what, feels really like that charge of magnetism between us and another person is our subconscious attempting to do some of the cleanup work around our pain points from the past. So it's actually less about this person, because if this were my person, they wouldn't be doing something like ghosting me. They would care about how they were making me feel. So it's a little bit, the shadow work is going back for that young part of me that really believes that I'm worthy of love or not, or that the type of love that I'm worthy of is the type that would leave me hanging without explanation. And that's my work to do. That's not really about that other person.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about when we are confronting parts of ourselves that are sort of unsavory, that maybe we rejected or we judge in others, and really they're just reflecting that? Can you share a little bit of how people can sort of integrate that?
Yeah, well, what I love to have clients do is when there's someone that they feel like is like a nails on a chalkboard person, like this person just like activates me and I can't figure out why, I'm like amazing. Like write down the qualities that that person embodies that are just like really difficult to tolerate, right? And a lot of times it will be they're selfish, they're full of themselves, they take up space in a room and they don't think about how anything is making everybody else feel, or whatever they're doing is making other people feel, or I'll just have them list out qualities, right?
Or they're lazy.
Yeah. So I'll be like, okay,
that's a big one.
Yes. Like which quality irks you the most when you think about it? And it's like, okay, they're lazy. I'm like, okay. So what feels historic there about lazy? Like what messaging did you get about being lazy? And a lot of times it's like, well, when it was Sunday, like I would be wanting to just like relax a little bit. And my mom would be like, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean, get up. Like you don't get to be lazy. Like I always have to be productive, or whatever the messaging is. And so a lot of times the shadow that we're projecting at that person is they're being lazy. Are they being lazy, or are they just resting? Are they just taking care of themselves? Are they just allowing themselves to be who they are unapologetically? And a little bit that feels like, because must be nice. I don't get to do that. I don't get to rest. I don't get to be, quote, lazy. And so a lot of times it's some part of me that I have been conditioned to reject, that it's my work to go back and sort of say like, maybe I'm not being lazy when I rest. Maybe I am taking care of myself or giving myself an opportunity to just be in my body. And I need to reclaim that narrative a little bit. And what that person is evoking within me is trying to demonstrate how difficult it is for me to tolerate that within myself.
And what you just explained, I think, is one of the core roots of what goes on in couples that are struggling is that we're attracted to someone who may actually embody the very thing that we have rejected within ourselves. Yeah. And then if we don't do that integrative work, eventually the thing that we were attracted to in the other person, we start to hate them for it.
Exactly that. And it's so funny, Jillian, because
It's wild.
It's the yin to the yang, right? Like we choose someone who is different a lot of times because they embody things that we don't really like, you know, it's sort of our underdeveloped function within us, that thing that like, it's hard for me to just go with the flow and be in that free flowing energy.
Yeah.
So I'm really attracted to that in someone else, but then I marry them and I make them wrong for that for the rest of our lives. And it's like, well, that's actually why you chose them. And if you can celebrate your difference versus making the other person wrong for it, then we have a little bit more harmony.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So this is an important thing for people to take note of. If you're in a relationship and you are all of a sudden just annoyed at, because this is to go full circle to the first thing that I brought up, that your quote, which is healing relationships isn't about fixing the other person, or we could say changing the other person. It's about finding harmony within. I think that perfectly demonstrates it, which is there is a difference between being in a relationship with someone who has certain habits that are interfering with the harmony of the relationship versus who they are.
Yes.
And so if you fell in love with them, or you were drawn to them because they were go with the flow and you needed more of that in your life, but now you're all caught up in your neurosis and you are annoyed by them being go with the flow, and so then you try to change them, and that is not love.
That's right. Yeah, I could not. I mean, and that exactly what you said. It's like, we need to reframe what it is to love someone. And ultimately, yes, we don't ever want to be in dynamics that aren't honoring of who we are or abusive. But when we are fundamentally trying to change another person so that we can be more comfortable in their presence, I think we've really got to put away the idea that that's loving them.
Yeah, absolutely. And also to see where we might be needing to do some shadow work around whatever that is. I think that's a really important self-reflective question for people to ask themselves. Do I need my partner to change because something has really become intolerable for me? Or is there something, am I trying to change them because I haven't done the necessary integrative shadow work to be able to appreciate who this person is, and that maybe the very thing that I want them to change is the very thing that I need to actually build up in my own self.
Absolutely. Yeah. That part, that's a little bit my growing edge, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that can tie in the whole masculine and feminine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, you know, it's always, again, that mirror, and it's not saying that that person doesn't have their own stuff and their own cleanup work to do. We all do. But I think just understanding that a lot of times it's an invitation for me to embody some more of that aspect of myself that I'm finding so frustrating in the other person. And
yeah, I really wish I added that to the book, but that's why you can't put everything in one book.
Next one.
Dené, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience, or anything that that we didn't cover that you would like to go over as we wrap things up?
No, you know, I mean, I don't think so. I think it's an exciting time for who we're becoming relationally. I love the work that you do so much, Jillian, because it just feels really aligned with what I feel so passionate about, and that like we actually are a lot more powerful than we're giving ourselves credit for a lot of times. And that if I do this thing of taking responsibility for what this is bringing up in me, then we can just love one another well. So thank you for the work you're doing. I respect you so much.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Thank you. Where can people find you and your brilliant work?
Thank you. I'm at DenéLogan.com for my website. And then on like all the social media channels, I'm Dené.Logan.
And your book.
And my book, it's called Sovereign Love, A Guide to Healing Relationships by Reclaiming the Masculine and Feminine Within. Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, forget it. Oh, yeah, there's a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And have you seen this work? I'm sure you've seen it really help a lot of people.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
It's amazing,
thing
right?
about, polarity is as we do take responsibility for our energy, we start to understand that because we're energetic beings, the energy between us inevitably shifts. So a lot of what I walk people through in the book is like, here's how you do it. And then you don't do it to change your partner, but the dynamic changes between you when you change,
Yes. Oh, well, everyone needs to read this book.
Aw, thank you, Jillian.
Thank you, Dené, so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to, will there be a next book?
I mean, yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. Okay.
Like percolating some things, but yeah, thank you.
Well, it was lovely to talk to you. It was long overdue. So
oh my gosh,
thank you for being
thrilled
here.
To get to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you.